The dollar has been, as I said in a column a number of weeks ago, doesn't necessarily deserve all its friends. One of the things that the dollar has been benefiting from for more than 2 years now is a phenomenon, an effect that we all know from trading, we all know very well. Whenever things get rough, whenever things get unpleasant, whenever things get dangerous, and whenever traders get worried or investors get worried, they still flock to the dollar. There are forces out there that, given a different situation, would certainly be punishing the dollar, primarily the budget deficits of the U.S. government and the liquidity provisions of the Fed. Enormous amounts of liquidity have been pumped in, and by and large, that damages the currency. But that's not what we're seeing here. As with the dollar, you have the reverse on the euro, and that's what we're going to talk about here. The European system, as designed now and as existing now with the EMU, the European Monetary Union, and the ECB, coordinating an economic but not a political and not a fiscal union of 16 countries now, or did one more join? Maybe 17 countries now. And in the background, of course, the 27 members of the EU. These two organizations are dependent on two treaties between democratic governments. The origin of the EU is in the Treaty of Rome. I think it's 1954. If someone knows better, please type it in and I will stand adjusted. The second is, of course, the Maastricht Treaty, which set up the EMU after the failure and the collapse of the ERM, the European rate mechanism, back in the 90s. Both of these treaties are treaties between governments. The governments that accede to these treaties, that proposed and ratified them, are democratically elected. And the question always has been unanswered for these organizations: what if, due to circumstances beyond the government's or the governing elite's controls, the people of the country, the democracy of the country, the populace of the country, no longer sees an advantage in being a member of these organizations and elects a government to change that? This is certainly possible. Many strange governments have been elected, not assumed power on their own. To give an extreme example, and please, I am not drawing any parallels between the EMU, the EU, and Germany in the 30s, but the Nazi regime was originally assumed power by legal means. So where are we if there is a nation, and it is possible, without doubt, depending on how bad things get, that elects a government that does not want to participate in the organizations here. Primarily, I'm thinking not so much of the EU, which has been an enormous success, but of the EMU, the euro. No, it's not Fox News, sorry. I see the comments up there, and I will respond to them through the microphone rather than I'm typing in there. And this is why I focus my last column on Alex Weber, who is still the now resigned head of the Bundesbank. He was, without doubt, in line to be the replacement for Jean-Claude Trichet at the head of the ECB. Now, Mr. Weber's personal history, he was an academic until he was, rather surprisingly, appointed to the Bundesbank he made public some of his doubts. Apparently, he was considering or being considered for the head of Deutsche Bank after Josef Ackermann leaves, a far more remunerative post, although perhaps not as powerful or perhaps more powerful, I'm not sure which, rather than head of the ECB. And he made his diffidence public. That, according to news reports, infuriated Angela Merkel. The reason is political. The Deutsche Mark is much missed in Germany. The ECB and the euro are seen by much of the German population as supported by Germany to the benefit of the more profligate states of the southern tier. Just as an aside, Mr. Berlusconi was the Prime Minister of Italy, was apparently being considered for charges of, well, we wouldn't, for charges, I think, of soliciting sex from an underage minor, or all minors are underage from a minor. Anyway, so that is not a particularly good time for Angela Merkel and the German coalition she represents. However, the things that the ECB and the EU have done to rescue the various countries are not at all in first Greece and then Ireland, and perhaps Portugal next. We can take a look at the Portuguese spreads shortly. They were up, I believe, 14 points yesterday, and the 10-year that I looked at yesterday is at a high for this cycle. All of these countries are at, not all of them, we'll talk about those in a minute. These actions, these institutions, as proposed, are not at all popular in Germany. Angela Merkel has a series of provincial elections at the end of this month in 3 of the German provinces, Saxony-Anhalt, Baden-Württemberg, and Rhineland-Palatinate. Her coalition, Christian Democrats, and I forget who they're allied with, stands a very good chance of losing these elections. If they do lose these elections, it will be much harder, despite the news that you saw today that the European finance ministers have agreed on some sort of permanent facility. They agreed on a facility, but they forgot to fund it. The reason they forgot to fund it, even though this was not said, is because probably the Germans have not agreed how to fund it. Because as we've seen already, and we'll see in the future, any rescue plan or institution or organization for the over-indebted, over-deficited countries depends on German credit. No one else is backing up these institutions and these rescues except German credit. So if Angela Merkel loses these elections, it will be much harder for her government, because there are future elections coming, there are more elections in the fall, to maintain its power if it wholeheartedly supports, as it seems to, because after all, there really isn't any choice in this matter, supports these institutions and further German support of these institutions. This is why Mr. Weber's resignation, I thought, and still do, was far more important for the euro than what was going on in Egypt.